Have you ever heard about the ghost warriors? Elite fighters so well trained that they could fight at night without even the enemy knowing they were there? And when the moment was right, they would attack with such ferocity that none could stand against them. Well, if you haven't heard about it, you're in for a treat, because today we will look at one of the most incredible stories in ancient history. The story of the ghost warriors, the brave Germanic tribes who took on the mighty Roman Empire and won. This is the Battle of Teutoburg Forest AD 9. Before we dive into the battle, we need to meet the ghost warriors. The ghost warriors were an elite group of Germanic fighters who lived in the northern part of Germania. Their strength should not be underestimated because these men were not just warriors, they were ghosts. Yes, you heard me right. They specialized in night warfare. And to make themselves invisible during the night, they would cover their bodies in a mixture of ash and soot. This made them blend in perfectly with the dark trees and shadows, allowing them to sneak up on their enemies without being seen. And when the moment was right, they would strike with their spears, slings, javelins, or clubs, inflicting casualties on their opponents and sending them running in terror. Their ferocity and skill in combat was unmatched, making them a force to be reckoned with on the battlefield. Now let's get back to the story. The Germanic tribes had good reason to fear the Romans. Rome had already conquered most of Western Europe and was now eyeing German territory. The Germanic tribes knew they needed a strong leader to unite them and protect them from the Roman threat. Enter Arminius, also known as Hermann. Arminius was born a noble in the Carusi tribe, but he wasn't just any ordinary tribal leader. No, sir. He had been educated in the Roman army and knew their tactics inside out. You see, Arminius' father had actually served in the Roman army. And when he died, the Carusi sent young Arminius to live with his uncle, who happened to be a Roman senator. So Arminius grew up in Roman culture and learned their language, customs, and military strategies. He was a true Roman in many ways, except for one small detail. He was also a fierce warrior and a brilliant strategist. So when Rome started marching into Germania, Arminius found himself torn between two worlds. On one hand, he had grown up admiring Roman culture and had many Roman friends. But on the other hand, he knew that Rome was a threat to his people and their way of life. In the end, his loyalty to his people won out, and he decided to turn against Rome, secretly planning to defend his people from the invaders. He reached out to neighboring tribes and united them against Rome. He chose the Teutoburg Forest as his battleground, because he knew it like the back of his hand. The forest was dense and difficult to navigate, which made it perfect for ambushes. And ambushes is exactly what Arminius had planned. But before the battle began, we have to meet the man who would lead the Romans into this disaster. The infamous Roman general Titus Liberius Varus. And let me tell you, this guy was not your average Roman general. Varus was a real piece of work. You see, Varus had been a prisoner in Germania and he knew firsthand how dangerous the local tribes were. Yet he was eager to prove himself by conquering Germania. And so he assembled 3 legions, around 20,000 men in total, and marched them into the very heart of the Teutoburg Forest. Now normally, a wise general would keep his troops in a tight formation to protect his flanks and prevent surprise attacks. But not our boy Varus? No, sir. He wanted to show off his military genius, so he stretched his formation, believing that he was too strong to be defeated by a few scattered Germanic tribes. Little did he know that Arminius had a plan that would make those Germanic tribes stronger than a whole Roman legion. As the Romans marched deeper into the forest, they found it more and more difficult to navigate the dense undergrowth. Suddenly, some of the men cried out, "Look, an ambush!" Sure enough, they could see Germanic warriors emerging from the trees, brandishing spears and swords. But it was too late. The ambush had sprung, and the Romans were under attack. The fighting was fierce, and the Romans struggled to defend themselves against the relentless Germanic warriors. It seemed like they would never stop coming. Then, as if out of nowhere, the ghost warriors appeared. These elite fighters moved through the forest like phantoms, striking from the shadows and disappearing again before the Romans could react. The Romans were terrified. They couldn't see the ghost warriors coming, and they couldn't fight back against an invisible enemy. To make matters worse, the Germanic tribes were using hit-and-run tactics, attacking the Romans during the day and then retreating to their camps at night. During the night, the ghost warriors would cover their bodies with ash and soot, making them nearly invisible in the darkness. The Romans were exhausted and demoralized. They had been fighting for days without rest, and they didn't know how much longer they could hold out. As the third day of fighting began, The Romans were on the verge of collapse. Suddenly, Varus realized the terrible truth. He had walked right into Arminius' trap. The noble he had once called friend had betrayed him, and now his 3 legions were scattered and on the brink of destruction. But Varus was a Roman general, and he wasn't about to give up without a fight. He rallied his troops and ordered them to march out of the forest. They fought their way through the thick undergrowth, desperate to reach open ground where they could finally breathe. Meanwhile, Arminius knew that the Romans were trying to escape, and he ordered his men to pursue them. The Germanic tribes were faster and more maneuverable, and soon they had the Romans on the run. But Arminius didn't want to chase them forever. He knew that eventually the Romans would reach the safety of their fortified camps. So he ordered his men to stop the pursuit and form an ambush along the road leading to the camps. When the Romans reached the road, they thought they were finally safe. They were wrong. As they started to relax, the Germanic warriors struck. The ambushing force was too strong, and soon the Romans were under attack. The fighting was intense, but it was clear that the Romans were outnumbered and outmaneuvered. One by one, the Roman camps fell until only one remained. Inside that final camp were Varus and his personal guard. They fought bravely, but they were surrounded and overwhelmed. In the end, Varus fell, mortally wounded. He looked around at the carnage and realized that his entire army was wiped out. There was nothing left to do but end his own life. The Germanic tribes had won a decisive victory against the Romans, and Rome would never forget it. In just 3 days, Rome had lost around 10% of its entire military force. That was a devastating blow. The Battle of the Teutoburg Forest is considered one of the most important battles in ancient history. It marked the end of Rome's plans to conquer Germania and showed the world that Rome was not invincible. After the battle, Arminius and his fellow Germanic leaders became legends in German folklore, and the Ghost Warriors were celebrated as heroes. And that, my friends, is the story of the War of the Ghost Warriors. What do you think of the Ghost Warriors? Let us know in the comments below. Now, if you enjoyed this video, then make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on future content. Thanks for watching. See you next time.